Good afternoon and welcome to the UK BIM Alliance Q3 update. I'm Christine Gorsden, and I am part of the current communities leadership team. I'm chairing the first half of the session today, and my colleague Jason Whittle will chair the latter part. As is per normal on these occasions, Pam Bandel will facilitate, and I need to say will facilitate from an expert perspective. Just some housekeeping rules in the first instance. You are all, as attendees, you are all muted. However, if you wish to ask a question on the end of each session, you can type a question or you can raise your hand. And again, Pam will seek to facilitate in this regard. We've allowed a limited time for questions on conclusion of each session, and then there's a generic slot that Jason will manage on conclusion of the entirety of the updates. So if you want to ask a question, my suggestion is you make your question count. Just a reminder that you are being recorded. This is being recorded and will latterly be made available on the UK BIM Alliance YouTube channel. Just a brief look at our agenda for today, self-explanatory. I'm delighted that we're going to commence with David Churcher. We will then follow up with an engagement update, which Andy will lead. We have another guest speaker, George Stevenson, who is going to talk about an innovative perspective in terms of BIM for housing. We've then got an update from Warren and Will, effective 2 implementation. Casey is going to give us an update particular to Building Smart, and then we will conclude, and certainly by no means least, with Anne with her view from the chair. And then as before, we will have a generic Q&A session on conclusion. It gives me great pleasure to introduce David. David is really well known to you all, particular to his hard work relative to the ISOs, the ISO 19650. Last week, ISO 19650 Part 3 was launched. Many of us heard David's keen words as part of the BSI presentation, but I'm delighted to introduce David to you today to talk us through IS 19650 Part 3. David.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Christine. And it's lovely to be here to give you this update on the newly launched Part 3. Pam, if you could move on to the next slide for me, please. My name's David Churcher. I'm a director at Hitherwood Consulting, and also I've been the lead author of this particular ISO part and engaged, as many of you will be aware, in the development of the other parts of ISO 19650. Next slide, please, Pam. Just a few things I want to cover in the course of this session. Just briefly to put Part 3 into perspective in the series of standards, and then to reflect on some things that are the same as they were from PAS 1192 Part 3, which this ISO is replacing in the UK BIM framework, and then talk through some of the key changes that have been made. And lastly, finish up by just giving you some pointers to where guidance is already available for those of you who want to get cracking to implement ISO Part 3. Thank you. Next slide, please, Pam. This kind of organization chart is familiar to many of us in terms of setting out the position of the various parts of ISO 19650. We've had parts 1 and 2 for over a year and a half now, since the tail end of 2018, beginning of 2019. And many of you will be aware that the Part 5 on security mindedness was published in June this year internationally, and then published in the UK in July. And recently, as Christine was saying, we had Part 3. This is the operational phase information management specification, published internationally in July, and then published as a British standard in August 2020. So it's less than a month out of the gate. And that, of course, means that the previous standard PAS 1192 Part 3 with the orange cover, that has now been withdrawn. Of course, there will still be people who are using it. Quite rightly, it's not necessary to immediately switch from one standard to the other, but gradually over time, then the new ISO will be the standard to be referenced in contracts and in appointments and used in the operational phase of assets. Next slide, please, Pam. Thank you. Just a few headlines here of some of the things that those of you who are familiar with PAS 1192 Part 3 will hopefully be comforted that these have remained the same in the way that the ISO has been written. Of course, the actual words are not going to be the same, and they don't look, the style of the document is not the same, but these underlying ideas about managing information during asset operation, facility operation, these are brought across. So the fact that we have information production being driven by trigger events, these are the activities that happen, the events that happen during the life of the asset, that is still the same. And there's as broad a range of trigger events as ever there was, ranging from individual items of maintenance to even full-scale redevelopment. These all count as triggers, maybe even perhaps a lightning strike or a change of legislation. All of these triggers could require different pieces of information to be produced or no longer to be produced. For example, the ongoing discussions about golden thread, when that comes into the legal framework. The requirement for the need to prepare information requirements is still with asset owners and operators, just like it always was. So they are in charge, they are driving this process. But as we can see, the scope of Part 3 is now much broader than the old PAS Part 3 was, in that it has a lot of activities and requirements on the supply chain, the asset contractors, the maintenance contractors, and so forth. Anyone who's brought in to do any of the work, they figure quite heavily in the new ISO. The commercial relationships don't matter. The ISO is intended, just as the PAS was, is intended to act and be relevant across all kinds of commercial relationships. So you should be able to apply it in all sorts of circumstances. And the reliance on common data environment, processes and tools is still there as it was in PAS 1192 Part 3, but actually probably spelled out in more detail now. It was always a bit of an aside in the PAS, whereas now it is much more center stage, as indeed it should be. And from a practical point of view, this idea that the information that is being collected and provided in the asset information model, that of course can be stored across a very dispersed range of systems. Some of these might be existing enterprise systems where they can be used, where they're suitable. There might be some new systems added on top or to complement those. That is all exactly the same as it was in the PAS. So again, no change to that sort of hopefully quite practical approach to putting the information model into an organization in a way that is useful and also as efficient and cost effective as possible. If we move on to the next slide, please, Pam. Now we're going to look at some of the things that have changed in the new ISO. I'm not going to talk through these bullets because I've got a series of slides following on which will take these one by one and just give me a chance to say a little bit more about some of the things that have changed in relation to the way the new ISO standard has been put together. Also the fact that it is now part of a family in a much more structured way than I think the PAS was. I mean, yes, they were all 1192 standards, but they weren't really developed by the same team with a consistency across all of the drafting and development that went on in the PAS standards. Whereas in the ISO, there is a much more explicit family feel and also a continuity of the individuals engaged in producing the standards, which I think has been really helpful. So Pam, if we move on to the next slide, please, then I can tell you a little bit about the terminology that we have in ISO 19650 Part 3. And in line with the way standards work, then we have the bulk of the definitions of terms in the sort of overview standard, Part 1, that sets out the concepts and principles. So a lot of the language is defined in Part 1, and Part 1 is a normative reference, which means you really need to have it alongside Part 3 in order to apply and understand what's written in Part 3. That's simply so that lots of things don't have to be repeated from one document to the next. And it's a standard way that these types of documents are structured. The words themselves, if for those of us who've been getting really immersed in applying and thinking about Part 2, will be very familiar to us. So everything is talked about in terms of appointments, appointing parties, appointed parties. That is all carried across in the same way as it is in Part 2. Nothing to do with contracts, contractors, suppliers, clients. None of that language is in there in the standard. Although of course we need to use that language in everyday speak. The requirements are also similarly split down into shalls, which are the absolute things that have to be done, and then the shall considers, where we in the standard we give a list of considerations which make up that shall. Now the organization that is going through that set of considerations doesn't necessarily have to do anything as a result. They might be considered to be not applicable, but at least you have to demonstrate that you have considered them. This is a way of making the standard scalable to all different types of application. So from the smallest facility and asset management task through to the largest and most complicated sort of asset portfolio, then the same approach can be used. And those shall consider lists either get longer or they get thought of as not applicable and not taken any further. The key word is information, and information containers and information models are used in exactly the same way as they are in Part 2. So all the references are to information containers, and information containers are then grouped into information models, which then form the subject of information exchanges and the federated information model and the asset information model. And the team structure, which we'll come on to in a separate slide, so I won't dwell on it, but that again is carried across from Part 2 in a very sort of parallel way. The wordle on the right is generated using the actual text of the ISO, so it actually shows you which are the most frequently used words in ISO Part 3. Hopefully there are no surprises there to the sorts of things that you would expect. Let's move on to the next slide, please, and start to think about the process of information management that is spelt out in Part 3. And again, if I refer back to Part 2, there is a single 1 to 8 linear process flow of those 8 steps in the pathways in the information management process. That's in Part 2. In Part 3, it's become a little bit more complicated. There are still 8 steps, as you can see, and by and large, they are the same. Certainly, once you get down into the detail of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, the content of those steps is almost exactly the same as it has been in Part 2. This is intended to make it as easy as possible to pick this up and understand what's happening if you've already had an introduction to the part 2 process on projects. The reason for the different pathways is because of different kinds of trigger events that we have to deal with. The pathway along the top is for trigger events that can be planned for in advance. And in those cases, steps 2, 3, 4, and 5, which are about tendering for the appointed party, the lead appointed party, and then mobilizing them and getting them to do their detailed planning, all of those steps can take place before the trigger occurs. And that's the little circle with a pentagon inside it. So they can be sitting there as appointed contractors or surveyors or whoever, just waiting for something to happen. And then the moment it happens, they're already mobilized, they're already planned, and they can just leap straight into action and do their technical task and also produce their information alongside. The other side of the coin is at the bottom of the screen with the not planned for or unforeseeable trigger events, acts of God, things that are going to happen, but they're so rare that you wouldn't get everybody engaged and on board in advance, because otherwise they'll be just twiddling their thumbs for goodness knows how long. So in that case, it's a reaction to a trigger event. The trigger event happens, and then all of the steps about getting the lead appointed party into the delivery team, then they start happening. So there is then going to be a delay before you get to step 6 and 7 about producing information and putting that through approval and acceptance processes with the asset owner or operator. But that's exactly the same sort of style of operation that we have in the project world, where the trigger event to set the project up happens, and then all of those steps take place. So there is then that sort of delay between the decision to get going and then the actual appointed party, lead appointed parties being on board and able to produce their information. And just as an aside, we have the third pathway of acquiring an asset, much more streamlined, as you can see, effectively just an acceptance of information from the previous owner, which then might give rise to a whole load of follow-on triggers where that information is seen to be full of holes or incomplete or not useful in the way that the new owner had hoped it would be. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, please, and think about the information management process from a different perspective. So rather, what I was saying a little earlier about the way that the process responds to different kinds of triggers. Triggers give rise to the appointments of the lead appointed party and their delivery team. Then some of the process is, if you like, asset wide and is going to be worked through firstly in advance to get the asset owner up to speed and ready to be in a position to start engaging with their first lead appointed parties. So that's step 1. That's very similar to the step 1 in the project process. And then at the end of the process, there is a review of, are we still interested in this asset? Do we still need to be collecting information and managing information in relation to it? And therefore, do we need to keep going around this information management process again and again and again? And in between, there is the set of activities that get started when either a trigger happens or a trigger is being planned for, and that's the appointment specific part of the process, and that's the part which gets repeated again and again and again every time a new lead appointed party is brought on board to do a particular piece of work in relation to a trigger event. Okay, can we move on to the next slide, please? I realize I am rattling through this, so if you do have any questions, I hope you're typing them into the questions box, and we'll maybe come to a few of those when I've finished speaking, and any that I can't answer or come up later, we'll deal with at the end of the whole session. The relationships, as far as 19650 Part 3 are concerned, are almost identical to those that were spelt out in Part 2. So this is the diagram. It's the same diagram as we had in the introduction to 1960 Part 2. And the key to the diagram, which I've reproduced, is almost identical as well. The only thing that's different is that the description of the outer circle labeled 1 is no longer a project team, it's now an asset or facility management and operation team. But everything else is the same. So A is always the lead appointing, is the lead appointing party, sorry, excuse me. B is the lead appointed party, or however many lead appointed parties are appointed by the appointing party. And C is the next tier down of appointed parties who are producing information within the delivery teams. So we have these delivery teams led by the lead appointed party in each case. Of course, over the lifetime of an asset, even more so than during the duration of a project, there are going to be a myriad of delivery teams coming on board, being discharged, completing their work, going away, or possibly being given a term appointment where they might be on board for 5 years, coming back to the asset to do a piece of work every 6 months or every year. And so that delivery team will exist alongside others that maybe only are brought on board for a month or a week, or possibly even only a day. You know, all of this is entirely scalable. These delivery teams can exist for any length of time, but they still have to go through all of the same procedures and processes to plan their work, to plan their information delivery, and then to compile and deliver that information to the appointing party using the common data environment methodologies and workflows. Great. Next slide, please, Pam. And now, almost at the end, what we've done deliberately on in ISO 19650 Part 3 is to be much more explicit about how it interfaces with Part 2. So Part 2 was released and written first, but of course, in the overall scheme of things, from the point of view of an asset owner or a long-term operator, then actually it's the 25 years of asset operation that is the key driver. And projects come up from time to time, maybe to refurbish part of the asset, or to undergo a major replacement of it, or possibly even a complete redevelopment. But the asset itself exists before, during, and after that project happens. So this diagram, this slide, is illustrating that, and the sort of the pale red wedge shape at the top of the screen shows and represents the asset in use from time passing from left to right, and the asset information model perhaps being illustrated by the size of that wedge growing as different trigger events happen during the life, and their information is then added into the asset information model. And that goes on. This is during the operational 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 years of life of the asset. At some point, there is a decision that a project is going to be needed, and it may be a major system replacement at end of life, which is more than just your everyday bit of maintenance or repair. It may be a complete refurbishment. Oh, we seem to have gone back a slide. Sorry, can we go back to the, thank you. So at that point, the asset information model is then used as a source of reference information for that project. So the red star is the initiation of the project. The first thick red line is a drawdown from the asset information model to give reference information for this new project that's starting. And that then helps alongside the information requirements that have been established by the asset owner from their organizational and asset information requirements. That helps drive the requirements for that project, handed across to the delivery teams in that project. During the period when the project is live, of course, the asset is still being used, things are still happening to it. Maybe there are still triggers taking place, particularly if you've got maybe a partial refurbishment, then the other parts of the asset are still operating as normal. So the asset information model will continue to be added to during this project phase. Things happening in parallel here. So we need to be very clear about what's happening to different bits of information in this instance. And then either during the project or at the end, then there is the exchanges of information back to the asset owner and operator as that appointing party. And that information then goes back into the asset information model to update and complement the existing information that's there. And then life goes on. And maybe there's another project that's initiated a few years later, or possibly there's two projects going on in parallel, and all sorts of things can happen, of course. So this can become a very complicated scenario, but actually the processes that we have and the structure that we've got means that all of this can be managed, can be dealt with by applying and combining these two parts of ISO 19650, obviously with their own perspectives, and clearly in the blue box at the bottom, it helps enormously and is a requirement that there is some alignment between all of the driving documentation and resources, the information standards, the information procedures and protocols, so that the two phases of information management, operational style and project delivery style, actually can work in parallel with each other. Thank you. I think that's my last slide, Pam. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, not quite. Just to say very briefly that there is already some guidance in existence for 19650 Part 3, even though it's only been out for a month. There is a transition guide that's been published by BSI, that's on the right. I think that's available through the BSI website and also the UK BIM framework website as a resource. It's a free download. And on the left-hand side, we already have the first part, the first release of the guidance to ISO 19650 Part 3. It's quite slim at the moment, but we will be working hard over the autumn to add some more meat to the bones and make that a much more comprehensive document when we come to our next release of guidance. And of course, because ISO 19650 Part 3 relies on all the same concepts and principles as Part 2 does, then the thematic guidance that's been recently restructured in the UK BIM framework, guidances A to F, which have initially been written to support Part 2, they will of course also support Part 3. It's just that we haven't actually changed the words yet to make that happen. But again, that will be happening in the coming months. But even without it, you could still pick up those guidance parts and get some helpful advice and support from those thematic texts. Great. I think that is my last slide, apart from to say thank you. I've rather whistled through that, I appreciate. But if you've got any questions, if we've got any time now, then perhaps we can take them. Otherwise, we'll no doubt have them at the end of the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. That was a really clear and really concise presentation, much appreciated. And I have to say, from a personal perspective, and you know my background, the perspective of Part 3, particular to asset management, facilities management, is one I've personally been waiting on for some time. I like your reference to the asset being the key driver. And thank you for highlighting the guidance documentation out there. Quite likely most of our audience are aware of the guidance documentation, but they are really valuable resources. Again, seeking to simplify the process and to assist all comers. Do we have any questions for David?
Yeah, we've had a couple of questions coming, David. So the first one is, does the ISO differentiate asset management from facilities management?
Okay, yes and no. So really at high level, no, we treat them all as, or treat them both rather, as disciplines that are concerned with the operation of an asset. We have included facilities management in some of the language, particularly in the introduction, to hopefully make the document recognizable to the FM community. But we have, because in ISO Part 1 we focus just on using the word asset for simplicity, rather than always saying asset management and facilities management, then we've tried to use the same approach in Part 3 for consistency. But in the areas where we're able to be a bit freer with our language, we have explicitly pulled the two disciplines along together. Hopefully that helps.
Okay, thank you. And then one final question. The label LAP is confusing when there are several. There is usually a lead 2. What if all the firms are directly appointed as in CM? Can we overcome this confusion?
I'm sure we can, but unfortunately we can't do it through the words of the standard, because those have been written, at least for the time being. So this is where guidance and explanation comes in. The idea of a lead appointed party is in relation to a delivery team, of course, and the notion is that there can be many delivery teams, or maybe just one, depending upon the way that an operation is being structured. I'm deliberately trying not to say project. So it will vary according to the approach that's taken. But yes, you can have, and you will have, multiple lead appointed parties, but they will each have their own scope of work or their own scope of information delivery, and altogether they will generate the entire information model that the appointing party wants. And if the appointing party wishes to make a separate appointment to sort of ringmaster around all of those lead appointed parties, then they can do so. That's perfectly allowed for in the way the ISO is written. And that organization might then be the lead appointed party, but that's not a phrase we use in the standard. And so we are trying our best to explain it in the way that the guidance is being prepared and explained to people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Some great questions from the participants and ably responded to by David. So thank you, David. Really appreciate it again. And hopefully you'll stay with us for the concluding Q&A session. We now move on to the engagement update, which Andy will provide. I'm aware Andy has a whole host of updates to provide to you, and something I believe a little bit light-hearted on conclusion. Andy.
So yeah, thank you, Christine, and thank you, David. Really, really informative. And hello, everyone. Good afternoon. So I'll be doing the update today for engagement, but by no means does that mean you know, I need to credit Pam, because she does the majority of the stuff behind the scenes on this. Let me just move on, if this will let me. So I'll be covering the topics, or the work stream activities you can see there listed out under engagement. So a quick update on affiliates, our community groups, our patron sponsors, a quick highlight on upcoming events, talking about the technology group, UK BIM framework, and then a light-hearted piece at the end. So on to affiliates, and just for those of you who won't have joined a previous forum potentially, what is the affiliate program? So this is an initiative to bring together professional institutions and trade associations to work across silos and try and help us reach a wider audience and really deliver that consistent messaging. So a really important initiative for the Alliance and for Industries in this space. I'm delighted to announce that since the last forum, we have 5 new affiliated organisations that you can see marked by the stars there. So Mineral Products Association, the Nuclear Institute, Finishers and Interiors Sector, Builders Merchants Federation, and CIBSE. So really good news to have those guys come and join the program. Just at the bottom of the screen, you can see that's our team that are leading these and have allocated some of these accounts to and are trying to engage a wider representation across some of the other institutes and organisations. And actually, whilst you're listening in, if you know, your organisation, your membership group is not represented with the slides there, and you think you can help us to connect us to the right people to have a discussion with to get them on board, please do get in contact with the email address at the bottom of the slide. We're planning some activities ahead with the organisations we've currently got up there, but I won't go into that at this point. That'll be in an upcoming forum. Okay, moving on to communities. So communities, again, are our regional groups, our BIM Alliance regions and the BIM Force specialist groups. And we have a really active leadership team that you can see there, whose job it is to coordinate and try and bring the BIM Force and the regions closer together in a really slick working arrangement. And the guys are doing a really good job to support those groups along the way with topics, any resourcing issues, and hosting events and outputs. So there was recently a chairs meeting, so all of those groups represented under communities, the team invited the guys to a call to have a good discussion through a number of topics discussed, which you can see there. Each one of the groups representing in the call gave us a quick update of their current structure, current activities they're ongoing, and they shared some of their plans ahead. And in there we had 12 regions represented and 11 BIM4 groups, which is really good. And one of the main topics was just defining, actually, out of all of our community groups, who's active and who's inactive. And then specifically for the inactive groups, what can the leadership team here do to help support and reinvigorate? So there's a number of topics ongoing there. There was also a strategic discussion, which is really important. And again, I think it's a good bit of timing now where the Alliance is, where we can start to think a bit more strategically ahead in the longer term. So there's some really good ideas coming out of the communities that will feed into the wider strategy that will start forming looking ahead at the end of the year. And that's our communities. Always have to give our patrons credit and a mention on all of our events. So our platinum patrons there, you can see they sponsor it and give us the funding that we need to run the Alliance and do our various operations and activities. There's all our wider patrons, and again, earmarked by the 2 stars there, we're delighted to welcome 2 new patrons to the Mixed Mortar and Digital Construction Technologies group. So thank you to them. Just moving on to events. So upcoming events. So tomorrow, actually, so there's still time to register. Think BIM are hosting a webinar on AI and machine learning. Always really good content and agendas and delivery at Think BIM. Encourage you to register that if you can. There's a update from Grimshaw on computational design. Fujitsu and Agritech are doing a piece on AI and machine learning, specifically in the agriculture sector, so something a little bit different but wholly relevant. So encourage you to register for that. Then, as you can see there, on the 5th to the 9th of October, part of UK Construction Week, the Alliance are hosting the Digital Construction Hub, part of that event, where there's personal journeys, case studies and panels, and you can see under there's a number of themes and topics over the 3 days that will be covering a whole multitude of things. Really good stuff going on there. And then 15th and 16th of October, we're hosting a series of guidance webinar updates. So the new parts of the guidance that we'll talk about a little later on today, the authors of those guidance parts are doing sort of key takeaways, best practice from those documents. So don't miss those. Okay, so moving on to the framework itself, and again we will go through this in a bit more detail with the implementation update, but again, just touching on the structure of the new guidance recently released. So you can see over there to the right. So part 1 covers the 19650 series. We've got our component part guidance following each part of the standards, so part 2 and part 3 currently, and David talked about part 3. And then split into more manageable parts under that, A to F, that are written on the topics discussed first in part 2, but on the vast majority are applicable across all the series again. And there was a nice quote we thought we'd include from the feedback from Mark Swallow at Leeds College of Building there. The website address is there for the framework if you're not aware, so that will take you to the guidance, which is freely downloadable, and links to the standards where you can go and purchase those. Okay, moving on. So technology group, and Paul chairs this group, but there was a recent meeting, obviously welcoming Mortar into there as well, and Bill Dots into the tech group. I think there might be a, oh sorry, yeah, there's a bit of a animation on this slide. There we go. There they all are. The last meeting, there were a number of discussions and presentations around Digital Twin Hub. So we had someone from CDBB, DT Hub, do a piece there. There was a discussion around the interoperability expert group, an update from implementation, a discussion around BIM Delivery Cube, which was, I have to admit, a new one for me. That was part of the old technology alliance under CIC, I believe, back in the day. So they're looking to potentially reinvigorate that piece of work, and then a good discussion on product data, absolutely applicable. And there's an email address at the bottom should you want to put any ideas to the technology group, or indeed if you wanted someone specific to present on a technology at an event, that could be facilitated as well. Okay, so that's the update down, and now we've got just a little bit of light-hearted fun to break up the seriousness and themes of the talk. So this is a lovely little task Pam's given me. So Pam put out a questionnaire previously to everyone involved in the Alliance at the moment, with 34 very random questions to try and just build a bit of a profile on people. Just a nice light-hearted thing to do. So I'm just going to flash up. You'll recognise these lovely reprobates, some of you, a selection of people involved in the Alliance in various different guises. And I'm going to read out a number of those questions, not all 34 of them, don't worry, and give you the answers. And those of you that may know of some of the people there, please in the Q&A, as I go through, whoever you think that is, then post in there just for and we'll see what comes out the other end. So one of the questions, if you were another person, would you be friends with you? It's a random one, and the answer was probably. You would probably worry if the answer was definitely not. Second question, what is your favourite smell? Fresh air after the rain. Third question, mountain hideaway or a beach house? They went with mountain hideaway. What was the last film you watched? For a few dollars more. What is your favourite dessert? Vanilla slice. Summer or winter? Winter, interesting. And what is your favourite song? P Machinery, I've never heard of them, but some of you may have. What are your top 3 favourite foods? Okay, I can relate. Rolling Stones or the Beatles? Neither. Smoke varies. Very interesting. And if you were an animal, what would you be and why? A lynx living in the wild Scottish Highlands. Okay, any thoughts who that might be? And I'm going to go to Pam because she's probably monitoring this before I give it away.
Yeah, we've had a couple of suggestions. One came with a couple of people suggested Sean. Somebody has suggested Tom as well. So I'll leave it with you to do the reveal.
The big reveal, drum roll. And it's Mr. Reed, Duncan. There we go. Okay, thank you. That's the engagement update, and I will now hand the screen back, and it's to George Stevenson to do an update on BIM for housing. Thank you.
Classic, mate.
It is. I'm going to, Andy preempted there. I'm going to thank Andy for that enlivened update. Just to reiterate a couple of points, if you are out there as part of the audience, and as Anne always says, UK BIM Alliance and all of the actions and activities are open to everyone. So if you work for an organisation or you're party to an organisation where you think that organisation might potentially be an affiliate, do not hesitate to contact us. If you think you might have input to any of the groups, in particular maybe the technology board, please do not hesitate to contact us. Pam, I'm making the assumption there aren't any direct questions for Andy, but are there?
No, there were no questions.
Brilliant. Okay, so George, the floor is yours, and George is going to talk to us about a slightly more innovative manner in which he is managing, quite literally, the BIM for Housing Community Hub, and how he is seeking to obtain all sorts of experts and expertise as part of this group. So George, again, screen is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, I took over in April, and one of the first things we did was recruited people from across the industry who are involved in residential, but also are passionate to see change. And you'll see that it's interesting, that's not progressing. Fantastic. Why isn't that building? Oh no. Ah. Can anybody make a suggestion here? It's frozen.
Pam, do you have George's slides?
I do. Let me bring them up. I can possibly share them. Bear with me 2 seconds. Sorry.
Bear with me a second. I'll just try again. That'd be great if you've got them there, Pam.
I have got them ready to go.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, right. Yeah, so what we've done is created a series of working groups that represent the various different people in the industry. So we've got those involved in development, design, construction, manufacturing and advisory. And overall, we've got 65 or so people involved in the process. What's happening to me is I'm getting the GoToMeeting control come up for some reason. It's not letting me move on. Okay, I think somebody else is going to need to control it. I'm sorry, Pam. It's just not working.
All right, let me just swap you out as a presenter and I'll share my screen.
Okay. Very frustrating.
Let me just.
The difficulty is the builds, so I'm going to have to ask you to progress it for me.
Okay, that's fine. So let me just make this into PowerPoint mode.
Ah, I've got it working again. Sorry, could you just, I'm ever sorry, could you just try and make me presenter again?
Okay, there it is.
I'm sorry, Pam, it seems to be working.
Let me just, there you go. You should be presenter now.
Okay.
You need to reshare your screen, George.
Every time I'm progressing it. So when the, oh dear. It's just not letting me. Okay, is that me or you?
That's you, that's not me.
Cool. Okay, so that's working. Right, so we've got all these different groups, and they've been meeting at least once a month for the last 3 months, and some of them have been meeting twice. So we've had 28 meetings in 3 months, and given there's an average of 6 people, that's 168 people that have met over the last 3 months. Which I think is showing the sort of enthusiasm that we've got for the process. And I'm sometimes asked, how are we addressing the potential overlap with the work that's being done in BIM for HA, which you may or may not know about, but that's the Housing Association group. Well, the fact is that there's no replication, because the people that are running BIM for HA, like Varun Soni, is also running our advisory working group. And the other people like Tom Cannon, Gary Bellinger, Jack Ostrovsky, Johnny Furlong, Patrick Wilson, and Bill Watts, all of those are leading working groups within BIM for Housing. So there's no risk of us replicating work that's being done there. All we're doing is really adding to it. So I think you'll see that in a moment. And we've been using Teams to great effect. We've got the working groups. Here we've got the operations working group with the 4 of the big housing associations. And they're typically meeting, as I say, for probably an hour, hour and a half every couple of weeks. And what we've done, we've been running over the last, with a number of other people, we've been running working groups we've been running workshops over the last couple of years about BIM, and asking what sort of questions, what sort of barriers are people experiencing. So we've taken the questions that came out of those events, and we've given them to the working groups, and they're then using those questions that have come from the public, for want of a better term, to actually go through and say, which ones do we think in either operations or construction or design do we think are relevant to our particular area? And by doing that, we've then got them identifying the things that they think they've got something that they can contribute to. And we've then taken those, rather than the working groups themselves actually trying to come up with the answers, we've created work streams, and the work streams are there to take the outputs from the working groups to say these are the tasks that we want to be tackling, and then develop them into work streams that we can then start to tackle. So for example, here we've got 3 main ones, 3 work streams that we've got underway at the moment that they've identified from those original questions. We've got barriers to BIM, we've got MMC, which is quite a popular activity, and one of the most pressing ones that we've got is fire safety. So the way in which we're dealing with that is that each of those work streams identifies some topics. So the barriers group, for example, have identified that what we need are standardized EIRs and AIRs. Now that's something already BIM for Housing Associations have been working on, and now we're taking that and starting building on it. Another is change management. So how do we track change between design, construction, and what gets handed over? So how do we go through the technical submittal process and ensure that we're capturing that properly? So that's a particular topic that the barriers group are addressing. And each of those work streams are made up essentially of 2 to 3 people from each of the working groups. So what we've got is representative from each working group to deal with things that that actually affect across the piece. Another that we're starting on is looking at the O&M handover. So how are we actually tackling the fact that, okay, we might get a BIM model, we might get a COBie data set, but typically at the moment, we're still getting a PDF-based health and safety file and O&M, which contains information that actually needs to be related back to what's in the BIM model. But how does anybody audit and ensure that information is there and complete? So those are the sorts of things that the barriers group work stream are focused at. The MMC work stream, they've tackled education as being one of their topics, and logistics to be able to reduce the damage of things being delivered to site, and also looking at standard interfaces. And then the fire safety group, which actually has got its first meeting next week, although they have been doing some work already. They've got a part of the workshop that they've got next week is looking at what can they do to improve fire safety, in particular fire stopping, improving the quality of information that's coming back from the contractors to the operations team, and also in general terms, how can we create a golden thread through that process? So the MMC team is led by Karen Jones from Kingspan, and David Emery, who's currently producing training material for the CITB on MMC. So what we're able to do is pick up on initiatives that are already happening, and then we can bring those into the BIM for Housing work stream so that we can then disseminate that. And you can see there we've got good representation from across the industry. Here we've got the barriers to BIM working group. Now they're handling 3 or 4 different topics at the moment, so that's quite a rich group. And one of the things I mentioned earlier was that the work Barron's been doing with their BIM for Housing associations around producing a housing data standard. So that's looking really at feedback from all the housing associations about the asset types that they are maintaining, and then how they're being called, so that we can start to have a standard way of asset types being described. I don't know if you're familiar with OSCAR, but that's basically the Real Estate Information Exchange Standards Organization, a little bit like Building Smart for design and construction, but more focused at that side of things. And then as far as, and that's all being coordinated and funded by the Housing Association Charitable Trust. Now, we've become involved in it over this last couple of months to bring the work into the work that we've been doing with the BRE. And I say we, I mean Active Plan. We've been working with the BRE to produce a standard method of elements being described. And BIMsense, who you might know, has also been brought into that particular group. So collectively, we're producing this housing data standards data set. And then we're feeding that through BIM for Housing to back end to the working groups. So the intention there is then to take that information that's being produced, test it through the different working groups across the BIM for Housing community, and then provide feedback to the Housing Standards Group. So just to give an illustration of that, they've identified 248 standard asset types, which are going to go into the AIR, the standard AIRs that are going to be issued. But when we then looked at that, the attributes that people have been adding, the ones that are one of the interesting ones is fire-related attributes, particularly in today's context. And the only attribute that was being asked for by the housing associations was fire rating. And you might think that's enough, but in fact, MBS Chorus doesn't use the term fire rating at all. It uses fire insulation and fire integrity. So what we wanted to do was to make sure that the standards that are coming out reflect the requirements across the board. So what we've done is pass that information into our new fire safety group, which is led by Scott Sanderson from PLP and also Will Perkins from SE Controls. Will's company manufactures smoke detection and extract systems. But you'll see there on the right, we've got a really good representation of some profound experts in fire safety from right across the industry. And the initial review that we had, you'll see there we've got the first column is the fire rating, but then we've got fire integrity and fire insulation. We've also added in reaction to fire. Also, appearance is another one that is something that was suggested as being important, and also the applicable standards. So this is the sort of thing that we can then feed back into the standard data sets that Maren's team are developing. But after the event that I presented at last time, the last quarter, I was contacted by a Swedish fire engineering company called BRIAB, and they are both, they employ about 150 people, but they were very interested in what we're doing in BIM for housing. So we brought them into the group, and they are real experts. They're involved in writing the European standards. They're also a software company. So they develop software that add-ins for Revit, I think particularly, but I think they've also got something for ArchiCAD as well. So we're collaborating with them to bring their knowledge into our community. And they've added fire safety as being a rating, and another called construction product. So they're joining the meeting next week, so we're going to be, that should be very useful. So in that particular sense, this is going the full cycle. So the work that's come out of Varen's group has been passed into BIM for housing associations. We can then feed it back. And what we're then going to do is use that same model to look at things like standardized handover, but also then start to look at other topics like sustainability, recycling, how can we improve that, the magic digital twin. So across the groups, across the different working groups, what does digital twins mean to the different sectors? Why do we use the term simulation, or why do we use digital twin rather than simulation? And one of the biggies that I think is going to be coming through strongly now is how do we improve infection control? That might be through better services like cleaning, through operations, or it might be through air conditioning design, for example. And finally, we've also started collaborating with a number of the other BIM for house, BIM 4 groups. So here we've got BIM for Health, which is led by Steve Datson. We're working already with BIM for Water, the data templates that they've produced. We're going to be looking to see how we can apply some of their elements in ours. We've been working with Christine for some time now. Oops. And also the interesting ones there are the Health and Safety Executive, BIM for HSE. And also, finally, it's not exactly a BIM 4 group, but it's the 4D modeling group led by James Bowles. So James is contributing to BIM for Housing, but also we've got a project that we're working on with one of their clients, who's also a member of BIM for Housing, who's looking to reclad or is recladding one of their tower blocks. So we're hoping to bring all of that together so that we've got a real demonstrator in that process. Okay.
So Pam, do we have any questions for George?
Not a question as such, George, but a request. And that's a request on whether you have any outputs from the work streams that you would be happy to share with some of the other Alliance community groups to give them some ideas. So if you are prepared to share, if you let one of the team know, it would be great to see some of those outputs.
Yes, most certainly. We're definitely going to do that. And in fact, I mean, given that the first work stream only started in August, I'm hoping that we'll have something within the next couple of months that we can share.
Brilliant.
And I think we're also going to have something quite quickly, I think, from the fire safety group. We're definitely looking to share and follow that model.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, George. I'll just reiterate Pam's thanks there. And obviously, I have had a little bit of involvement with yourself, and I think this is a really interesting model. It enables quite a detailed level of discussion. However, you have mentioned some tangible outcomes, standards and recommendations that might be shared or will be shared with housing associations and wider groups. And likewise, it's a model that perhaps other specialist areas, other assets may take further forward. So brilliant, thank you for that. We are moving on, and we're moving on to implementation. The implementation team is comprised of Baron, Ash, Will and Sarah, and today it's going to be Baron and Will who are sharing with us. So over to you guys.
Thanks, Christine. The implementation arm of the UK BIM Alliance is focused on the facilitation of projects, either those that we see there is a need for within the industry, or those that are proposed by yourselves or by colleagues in the industry or even academia. Facilitation involves establishing the support required from the BIM Alliance and also having a degree of project oversight, just to make sure that we are prepared for any activities that the project requires from the UK BIM Alliance perspective, or how we can prepare the industry for the impact that the project will have within the industry. So that could be through our forums or through newsletters or websites. The team itself is made up of William Baker-Jones of Kier, who's over here, myself, Baron from Calford Seedon, Ashley Murray from McLaren Group, and Sarah Davidson from the University of Nottingham. You can see that there is a map here. The team was established earlier in the year, and the map here shows our physical locations, so we are quite far apart from each other. What's interesting about this is we've actually never met physically. We've all just met virtually, and we've been able to use collaboration software such as Microsoft Teams to build up a really proactive, coordinated response and a really productive team. We meet every other week. And we've been able to exploit the functionality of Microsoft Office quite a bit. And Will's going to take you through a few of the things that we've been doing and some of the working methodologies that we've come up with to make us more efficient as an alliance in the projects team. Will, I'll just pass it to yourself.
Thank you, Baron. Yeah, like Baron mentioned then, when I first joined the Alliance, my task was to look at how we, as an implementation team, look at getting projects into the Alliance and also supporting them. So one of the first things we looked at was how we could use Microsoft Forms to enable us to get the projects into the Alliance quicker. Traditionally, we just used an online form on the website that would just generate an email and send it to us, and then one of us in the implementation team would action that. Whereas now it's a lot more automated. We've been using Microsoft Forms. I'm hoping that in the next coming weeks, the project proposal form will be hosted on our website, which has just been updated. And then going forward, then if anyone was to submit a project, they can go onto the UK BIM Alliance website, fill out the form. It will then send an email to the implementation team, and then we can get onto that and assist. But in the form, it breaks down of what you actually require from a project, whether that output may be a survey, maybe that be a presentation, or anything of that nature that the UK BIM Alliance could support you through. So if you go to the next slide, Baron. So from the form, then we as a team, like Baron said, we're actually quite spread apart, and we've obviously had to embrace digital technology as everyone in the past 12 months. And Planner has become a fantastic tool for us. I don't know if anyone in attendance uses Planner, but it's become our holy grail in how we manage all the projects in the Alliance. I think going forward at the moment, we have roughly about 20 live projects running in the Alliance at the moment, and managing each of them is actually quite a task in itself. Whereas the form here will automatically generate the project and put it into Planner, and then we can allocate that to anyone in the Alliance, and then we can do our updates on each project in Planner. And it's just saving us so much time. But also for forums like this one, we can identify projects and give a full overview of what's happened on that project since it was proposed. And then going forward, then people have mentioned that we would need to look at how we are presenting the projects. So the next thing we're taking from this then is Planner's got all of our live projects. We're currently in development of making a Power BI dashboard, which will also be hosted on the UK BIM Alliance website. So if you currently go to the UK BIM Alliance website, you've got the project update, and it shows where the projects and what projects we have currently in the Alliance. Whereas that's quite a manual and laborious task to update. Whereas anyone that knows Power BI, it's quite a dynamic and almost parametric way of updating the data automatically. So if anyone in the industry needs to or wants to have a look at what active projects and what type of projects we've got running in the Alliance without actually even contacting us, you can just go onto the website and see the dashboard of what we're running at the moment. So that's currently where we are at the Alliance. So I anticipate in the next month or so, the dashboard will be up and running. So anyone who may be looking for submitting a project can go onto the Alliance website and see what sort of projects we are dealing with at the moment. And yeah, that's where we're going at the moment with the dashboard. And then, like I said, if anyone would to submit a project, we've got the online form coming shortly. But yeah, I'll pass it back to Baron to talk about the projects that we actually have in the Alliance currently.
Thanks, Will. Yeah, we've got a host of projects at the moment. Some that are in flotation already and being worked on, some that are coming over the next few months. Some of the projects that we have on collaboration with others like the CDBB and the UK BIM framework, projects such as the digitalisation of the guidance, which we'll talk a little bit about shortly. This is the CDBB, and some of the projects relating to ISO 19650 guidance form part of the UK BIM framework. Some of the other various groups that projects that we have are the BIM for housing associations, which I'll talk about shortly. And another one that's just starting to come into play, which is really interesting, is the State of Nation survey. And I think Andy's still on, so I was going to ask Andy if he can give us a quick overview of that survey.
I am, yep. Thanks, Baron. Just very quickly then, so that's we've drafted together, again, the purpose of this is a widest reaching survey, so it actually starts to measure a true reflection of UK construction, or built environment, I should say, not just construction. So actually a simple set of questions, nothing too involved or too deep or too time consuming. So we can use our affiliated organisations and other channels to actually try and get a really good representation of feedback to the survey. We've drafted it out. We're engaging with professional survey analytics companies to look to push that out towards the end of the year, running into next year, to do, yeah, and then to run that annually ahead, so we try and actually get a better measure on where we are as an industry in terms of maturing on the digital transformation journey.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.
The next project I'm going to talk about is the BIM for Housing Association project. This brings together participants from across the housing sector and from the industry, including asset managers from various sizes of housing associations, support from architects, engineers, BIM consultants and contractors that all work with these housing associations. It's actually endorsed by the UK BIM Alliance and the National Housing Federation, and is a cross-bodied, industry-bodied implementation project which talks about and looks at digital processes in construction and infrastructure. The aim of the project itself is to develop a set of exemplar documents which is compliant with the UK BIM framework, ISO 19650 processes, which basically provides a report that is quite easy and quick to use as the foundations for implementing BIM within the AJs. The aim of the report and the guidance is to cover a business case for housing associations and why they should be using BIM. This will include example projects and case studies. There's also a push to be able to show the benefits of applying BIM within existing buildings, as well as creating a set of exemplar asset information requirements for the asset management teams, exemplar exchange information requirements for the development teams, and also giving advice and guidance on procurement processes and appointments of relevant professionals for projects. This is, led by a few of the G15 housing associations, and there is a big push in the industry to be moving towards BIM. So we've seen a lot of interest in this project. It's led by Jack Ostrowski and myself, who chairs both the working groups on the asset and development side. The next project we're going to talk about briefly is the digitalization of the guidance. It's a project that's supported with the CDBB and Mortar. Basically, it's a proof of concept project to see if the guidance and any actionable tasks can be facilitated through an online platform. It focuses on the tasks associated with the processes within the project delivery, so ISO 19652, and appointing party tasks that are currently being tested by a host of different organisations, just to see whether it will work. This is something that is quite an interesting piece of work that we're hoping will be able to show us the benefits of digitalisation, and it is ongoing at the moment. And on our website, we'll give you some feedback on how that project's progressing. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to pass it back over to Will, who's going to give us an update on the guidance that's currently happening.
Thank you, Byron. So yeah, Sarah Davison was meant to cover this part. Obviously, she's one of the authors of the guidance. David mentioned it earlier about guidance part 3. So as of September the 4th, all the guidance was updated and was launched onto the UK BIM framework website. So it's all readily available and can be accessed via that website at the bottom of the screen. So the guidance part 1 and obviously the guidance part A to F across the parts of the ISO 19650 series. Guidance part 2 and 3 are specified to the ISO 19650 if you go forward. So I don't have much involvement in the authoring of the guidance. So Andy, are you able to have an update on the content?
Yeah, thanks, Will. Yeah, only quickly. So in terms of new content, so in the September 4th release, where these parts were produced that broke it down into more manageable parts on themes from the ISO. So information management function and resources is a brand new part of guidance. There's been updates to developing information requirements, and there is actually examples of different information requirements by Emma and Marcia mainly. And also part F, there's been considerable update to that about information delivery planning. So some really good content there to go and read. If you just move on to the next one. So again, supporting part D, so the developing information requirements, F and G helped work with the Alliance to produce a line of sight video, which is worth looking at. It's a nice, simple explanation video that helps to contextualize and visualize what it's all about in a really simple, bite-sized short video. And Emma also provided a kind of database approach to specifying information requirements that's also available via Airtable on the guidance framework pages. Next slide, please. And then again, David alluded to this earlier. So part 3 was released, obviously, and nicely timed with that. David also pulled together actually some initial guidance on the application of part 3, which will then get further developed for the release in Q1 2021. Just to note as well, it's not on the slide, but the National Annex update to part 2, that's also scheduled for January release, along with guidance in terms of implementation. Thank you.
So yeah, back to me then. At this point, that's all the updates from the implementation team. I'd just like to remind you that if you do have a project or anything that you're considering that you require from the UK BIM Alliance implementation team, again, we can support you by putting you in contact with BIM enthusiasts or industry leaders. We can offer assistance with publication and guidance and promotion of your work with the helps of, say, the newsletter and the likes, and then helping you, pointing you in directions for your projects. So if you have anything, please do get in touch via the UK BIM Alliance website. Our email is on there for the implementation at the UK BIM Alliance email. And that's all from us from the implementation. I don't know if there's any questions, Pam, for myself and Varun.
Yeah, we've had a couple come in. Thanks, Varun. Thanks, Will. Aimed at you, Varun. When does the BIM for Housing Associations project publish?
So we're hoping that it will be published at the end of November. We've started on the roadmap, and the roadmap's available, I think, on the UK BIM Alliance website, so they can actually see some of the dates that we've got available. But the aim is to publish at the end of November, start of December.
Thank you. I could probably answer this one, but I'll let you guys answer this. Is there going to be a master list of all the projects underway by our communities, by Building Smart UK and Ireland, by the Alliance, by BSI and CDBB, anywhere available to view?
I'm not entirely sure, actually. The work that we're doing at the moment is just based on the Alliance projects that we've got running currently. I'm not sure if there's going to be, correct me if I'm wrong, Pam, I'm not sure if there's going to be a one-stop shop for all projects that the groups and, say, CDBB are running at the same time.
No, and I would agree with you in that. I think maybe it's something to take further with maybe the UK BIM framework, where we could have something there that talks about all the projects that are involved from a UK BIM framework point of view. But it certainly is a good idea and certainly worth thinking about.
Absolutely, yeah. Again, it makes complete sense. Again, it's like I said, it's one place where industry can go to see current projects that are being developed or worked on.
Excellent, thank you. That's all the questions.
Perfect, thank you, Pam.
Okay, it's Jason Whittle here, just handing over from Christine. Christine, thank you for chairing the first part. I'll now obviously thank you to Varun, Andy and Will for the implementation update. And we're now going to hand over to Casey Rutland. Casey's the Vice Chair of the UK BIM Alliance and also Digital Director at Haskening DH3. Casey's here to talk about building UK Smart and Ireland this afternoon and give us an update on their activity, which is great because Casey is the chair of Building Smart UK and Ireland, so ideal to give us the update. So welcome, Casey. Hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Okay, to anyone that's on the call now that joined the Assemble event this morning, I apologise for this because it's going to be quite repetitive as to what went on this morning. If you didn't attend this morning, the whole session for 2 hours this morning will be uploaded to the YouTube channel later as usual. I assume Pam can confirm that afterwards, but it normally does take a day or two. Just going to whiz quickly through what we discussed this morning. So first of all, it's more of a reminder about what Building Smart's aim is, particularly in the UK and Ireland. We ran through an introduction and update from me. We had a case study from Peter Ruff of HS2 about the Euston tunnels. We had a technical update from Nick Nisbet specifically on Infrared and IFC 4x3. Then, quite helpfully and usefully, we had updates from who we now have in our committee, updating everyone on what's going on in the various rooms. Then, very, very quickly at the end, we had a wrap-up session from Emma. We didn't have time for questions, but we said we'd answer those on social channels afterwards. So, in terms of a refresher of what we're aiming to be, and it's turning out to be that, I'm quite pleased to say. We're aiming to be vast, so we need a wider audience, vibrant, vital and valuable. And I'm not going to go through all of these things in any particular detail, but we are already growing in numbers. We have a good sized committee now that's resilient and can take some fluctuations in people coming and going as and when their workload demands it. Hopefully you'd have noticed that we're being a bit more vibrant. There's a bit more buzz and activity about the UK and Ireland chapter of Building Smart now. And then the last two, we need to be vital. We need to be representing the UK and Ireland industry's needs, have a voice at the international level. And the same goes for being valuable, really. We need to really understand what your challenges are and represent them and make those needs known at the right levels, not just in Building Smart forums, but it helps us to gather opinions that we can put out into other forums also. Speaking of other forums, I'm in the process of defining what I call the mother of all Venn diagrams, but I've started by simplifying it to make sure the industry is aware and understands that the various different organisations talking about different digital aspects right now, live everywhere, online and in person, just to make sure that everyone's aware that we are all talking and that we do understand what's going on in various different places. And a few of the speakers before me have touched on some of the things that are going on. Obviously, you're aware of Building Smart UK and Ireland and the things that we do. I think I presented at this session the 2 forums ago, the link and the connection between the UK BIM Alliance and Building Smart UK and Ireland. To all intents and purposes, we are the same group. Slightly different people involved in those groups, but there is an overlap on the personalities within there. But both organisations sit within the legal entity of Syria. We have a steering committee that define what and steer us in what we both do. Added to that, we've spoken about the Centre for Digital Built Britain a couple of times today. And again, we have people engaged in meetings and programmes and projects at CDBB that are the same people that are involved in the UK BIM Alliance and Building Smart UK and Ireland. And then we have the BIM Interoperability Expert Group, a project run and funded by CIH via CDBB. And that, again, we have similar personalities within there. They're not necessarily the same person that's involved in all 4 organisations, but we have similar people involved in different groups. Then we have BSI, British Standards Institute. Obviously, they are the helpful people sending out all of and preparing all of our international standards for the UK market. Most of the time without any changes, but occasionally we do need to add national annexes in there, as you've seen with part 2 of the ISO. Then obviously we have what are called ISO C, just because it won't fit in the petal, is the ISO convening panel, which is chaired by Anne, who really take all all of our British standards and PAS 1192 suite and convert it and translate it into international standards, which we've all seen as being ISO 19650. Then we've got one in the middle, who I like to call Anne Kemp, Superwoman. And I think, as I tweeted earlier, she doesn't wear a cape, she tends to wear walking boots. But she really is the key to holding all of these things together. We do have different personalities in those places, but somehow Anne manages to find the time to be involved in all of these and give the commitment it needs to really hold it together and communicate what each of those groups are doing at what stage and involve the right people at the right time. So I have included the key on there just so that when we share this presentation afterwards, you can see this. I will be expanding this, not just to include the organisation names, but the individuals named within it. So you can start to see and appreciate who is involved and what it is they're doing in relation to the projects, some of which Baron's mentioned earlier. But really get to understand that the personalities and the people are the same, and that we all are all lined up and joined up in the right places. So I mentioned key people earlier, the committee. These are the people that sit in the Building Smart UK and Ireland committee at the moment. These are all people who have come forward after other Assemble events, such as the one this morning, and said, I'd love to be involved, what can I do? So I'm really quite happy that we've got this group of people that are such a diverse group of people in terms of their backgrounds, their understanding, and what they'd like to do going forward. But it's looking like a really good, solid, resilient chapter now. Room activities. We did run through just briefly this morning what a room is in Building Smart terms. I'm not going to go into too much detail in this, but essentially rooms are groups of specialists that represent a specific sector, who then undertake local projects based on the needs and requirements of that sector. This is why it's vital that we really do represent the UK and Ireland within that particular room and say, right, this is what we need as the UK and Ireland. Because what happens is ultimately projects are created then, and they will end up driving those projects that may end up being extensions or implementations into the IFC schema or other open BIM standards. So it's really vital that that's where the work is undertaken at the project level. Sometimes they are funded by membership fees, sometimes they're funded by specific organisations, but it's really important that we at least have the ability to have our say. This is far too much work for one person to do, as there's an airport room, building room, construction room, infra room, product room, railway room, regulatory room, and a technical room. And what we've helpfully started to do within the committee is to define leads or co-leads for all of these rooms. So these people are the people who coordinate the needs and desires of our UK and Ireland people. So if anyone out there has a challenge or says, right, okay, we really do need this in the product room, speak to James or Trish. We can get you involved in or included, or your concerns heard in whatever format suits you best, but then we can take those various different challenges that we have up to the international level and have them heard there. So we do have gaps. Again, as usual in these sessions, we do have a call to action, and if anyone is out there and is able to contribute either at an asset management level, design level, or as a client level from airports, then please do get in touch. It's not vital that you're an expert in these areas. It's probably vital or helpful if you're enthusiastic about airports in this instance. But if you are able to manage and coordinate the needs of the industry and feed them into this group, we'd welcome you with open arms into the committee. Depending on how much time you can offer, we try and make things nice and easy for you. But we do also need someone to help Nick on the regulatory side, and there's some really interesting work going on there. If you watch the recording from this morning, it's towards the end, but there's a lot of work going on when it comes to automated checking of regulations, and according to Nick, we can be very quickly in a world-leading position when it comes to that. So lots and lots of work going on. Just a couple of upcoming events. We have the Building Smart International Virtual Summit. There aren't too many details on the website at the moment, but that's running from 26th of October to 6th of November. The one that they held earlier in the summer was really, really good. Lots of really good quality presentations from around the world on open BIM processes and case studies and all the different technical bits and pieces, so you can get as nerdy as you like on those things. And then we have the Assemble 4 event, which is happening on the morning of the 9th of December, where we have this UK BIM Alliance forum in the afternoon. So please do join us, find out about what's going on with Open BIM, Building Smart in UK and Ireland. But please don't just come yourself. I say this quite frequently. Please suggest or recommend that a colleague joins us also. It's great that you guys are joining us on these webinars, but we really do need to expand our audience. That's the purpose of the affiliate scheme. That's the purpose of us starting to engage with universities. We really do need to reach a much wider audience for both the BIM side of things and the Open BIM side of things. So I'll leave it there. You can get in touch with us through all the usual channels, but I think I'll hand back and finish now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Casey. Definitely a good call to action there. So, Pam, are there any questions that have come through for Casey and Building Smart?
Yeah, and I was expecting this question. What is the difference between the building and the construction rooms, Casey?
Simple enough. There's more details on the website, but the buildings room is literally about information required to share about buildings. Construction is about the process of construction. So there's also, it does combine also into things about programming, about health and safety, about phasing, about all those logistics things that aren't necessarily included in the information we share about assets within a building.
Okay, thank you. And then there is just a comment from Dan. National annexes aren't changes, they are additional UK recommendations. The standard itself doesn't change. So that was it. That's all I had.
Yeah, what I meant was that most of they can just be instantly published as a thing, but sometimes they need to be added to. You're correct, Dan, as usual.
Thanks.
Okay, is that the questions, Pam?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Casey. Much appreciated. Okay, now we'll move on to our next presenter, which is Anne Kemp from the UK BIM Alliance. She chairs the group. We've already had questions in advance I've seen on her walk across the Pennine Way, so I'm sure she needs no introduction really, but anybody that doesn't know, Anne has just walked across the Pennine Way, which is about 260 miles, in order to raise money for charity like the Crash Charity, Mates in Mind and Map Action. I think she's raised about £7,000. So I think the questions are probably relating to what state your feet are in, Anne, and probably what state your brain is in after doing that incredible challenge. So I welcome you today and look forward to your update, the view from the chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jason. Really appreciated those comments. And yeah, so there will be, if you'll bear with me, I hope you don't mind, there will be a few slides on the Pennine Way. But first of all, what I wanted to do, and you have heard a lot about the ISO series and what's been happening, but I am really pleased and almost overwhelmed actually with the progress we've suddenly seemed to be making with bringing the 1192 suite to an ISO and a CEN level, so both at international but also at European level through the Vienna Agreement. And just looking at this slide and drawing this slide up last week for the Part 3 launch, it was like, my goodness, you know, how far we have actually come, even though in a way it does seem forever, doesn't it, for a lot of us. But you know, if you look at actually that now progressively the 1192 suite is being withdrawn, you can still get to them, but they are officially withdrawn, they won't be updated. And we are working now on BS 1192 Part 4 is going to be withdrawn as and when the ISO 19650 Part 4 is published. But I'll give you a little bit more detail of that in a moment. And you will spot there's Part 6 there. There is no proposal for the moment for that to be raised, but clearly health and safety is a hugely important part of our activities around the built environment. And Pam, I seem to be having the same problem that my screen is frozen.
Okay, bear with me, and let me just bring your presentation up.
Let me see whether that, no, it's okay. It's given me an alternative. That's all right. Okay, now I've discovered that. So here's the suite of 19650 series. So as you see, you've got 1, 2, and 5 now published and in circulation. There's clearly the transition guidance, which was there to help anyone who was familiar with the PAS 1192 series. But I think as the Alliance, it's really important that we remember, as Casey has said, the vast number of people across the built environment industry who haven't heard about the 1192 or BIM level 2 mandate, who haven't really been thinking about information management. Those are the people we really need to reach out to, not blind them with all of the technical speak that we have around the standards themselves, but being able to help them to implement in a pragmatic and a practical way. And I do think it's so important that we've reached this point of genuinely being able to say that we're embracing whole life. And we need to be looking at this from different perspectives. So certainly not just from design and construction. We are looking at strategic planning. We are looking at operations. We're looking at it both from an asset management perspective, from a facilities management perspective, but we're also looking at this as being the built environment in use. And when we talk about that, we are talking about ourselves as people, as society. And I think there you can start to see the principles that are also being talked about around Centre of Digital Built Britain and the National Digital Built Programme. So the part 4 that I just mentioned there, as I say, it's an important development. It will not be a carbon copy of 1192 Part 4 and COBE. It's looking at complementing parts 1 and 3 and supporting the sharing of asset information as part of a collaborative convergent process, just as you can see with that overview slide there. And we have been having regular meetings online. Nick Nisbet, as the technical author, I have to say, has astonished me, because every month we're doing calls at 8 o'clock in the morning and 8 o'clock at night, so that we can really involve the whole of the international community. And I have to say, I tend to stand back at 8 p.m. and let Nick get on with it, but he has my utter respect for the dedication he's showing on that. And being able to explain the principles behind what we're after, but then listening and understanding other people's perspectives so that actually we get this right, is, as ever, a really important feature of gaining consensus and understanding and developing standards which are actually going to be of help. So the 19650 Part 4 is providing, or aiming as we develop this, to provide the explicit process and criteria for any individual information exchange throughout that whole life, so that it can be really performed at in an efficient manner, but in a secure way. You know, looking at open formats and conventions, and being able to encourage the use of information exchanges which will be supportive of successful outcomes in the building, infrastructure and environment sectors. So a lot of work still to be done on that. There will be a national annex, and this is where the work of the BIM information expert, information exchange expert group that Casey was mentioning is going to be important, because we're looking at COBE, IFC, classification and so forth, so that we're really able to establish what needs to go into that national annex going forward. But as Casey quite neatly showed, I can't really say that I agree with the Superwoman, but it did make me giggle. Whilst I've been walking on the Pennine Way and before that as well, there are quite a lot of spinning plates, aren't there? And actually, I did like the petals, Casey. That's quite helpful. There's a few I think that we might need to add, including Sen. Another side of things which is being developed is that I've been asked jointly with Mark Enzer to lead the digital work stream of the Construction Leadership Council. It's being recognised how important it is that that thread is a strong part of what the Construction Leadership Council do. And another side of it, as we go through the BIM interoperability side of things, work streams that Fiona Moore is leading, is developing a standard approach around information. So not only the spinning plates of ensuring that we cover all our bases there, but then trying to assemble all of the disparate pieces of the jigsaw that are playing a part in digital transformation of the UK's built environment. So I've been really trying to mull over, what do we include, what's missing, but I think really what's important for all of us is knowing what our role is, what we're contributing, what value that we're giving to that. So this is a starter for 10. It's work in progress. I'd really welcome your input to that. If you think that I've missed things, I bet I have. Ideas you have, challenges you've got, problems you have, things that are missing that you think need to be on this. I have just pulled this as off the internet as a GIF, so I'm sure that we need many more pieces on the board than this. But and also it's not necessarily the best way to present this, but it is just to get our ideas flowing and converging here. There's a great book that I've been looking at, which is to be bolder and actually showing our thinking through blogs, through talks like this, and not being quite so scared of or shy or feeling vulnerable about sharing ideas, however immature they may seem. So I really welcome you, having a look at this. You can have a laugh at it if you think it's nowhere near, but just let me know what you think and help us bring the jigsaw pieces together so we can get to, as much as we can, a complete whole. But I do think it's really important that we also know what our role is and what we're contributing and how we fit together and work together as well as we can and enjoy what we're doing. And so I suppose I will now move on to what for me has been such an inspiration since March, when quite a few of you will know that I did my first 4 days on the Pennine Way and had to stop because of lockdown. And some of you will know just how upset and devastated I was, because I was enjoying the experience, I was enjoying the isolation, I was enjoying the moors, and then to suddenly go into lockdown and to be told that I was on the critically vulnerable list and had to go into shielding was pretty gutting. I've been really fortunate. I live in a beautiful home out in the open, being able to walk at weekends when I felt that I wouldn't meet people, and I've had family around me as well. And what has really bothered me, what troubled me as well as many others, is those who are cooped up in flats and have suffered from illness as well. But I hope that certainly some of the feedback I've had is that some of the photos I was sharing in March, it was really helping to lift people, and I was so sorry I couldn't carry that on. And I've just got these 3 slides just showing a few of the highlights that actually my husband then joined me the last 2 weeks of August, and we were able to complete the Pennine Way. And it threw everything at us. It's funny, isn't it? You take photos and they're usually of the best weather. It was wet, loads of rain, loads of mist, loads of fog, high winds, which were literally blowing us over, and bog. I think we had 2 days where our boots weren't saturated, probably within the first 2 hours. We were walking through bogs ankle deep, sometimes knee deep. But being together with my husband, with Martin was absolutely phenomenal. It certainly strengthened our relationship, going through all of those challenges, and have massive, massive precious memories. And it's been wonderful for me to look back at these photos as well. But I think some of you will know, and I've already revealed, that it was also a really emotional time for me, because the Pennine Way has been a life ambition. When I was first diagnosed with CLL, I thought that was not possible any longer. So that bottom right, I was an emotional wreck when I finished. I think the pub wasn't quite sure what to make of me when they gave me my free half pint of beer, but they were lovely about it too. And I want to extend a huge thanks to everybody who sponsored me, as Jason said, for Map Action, for Crash, for Mates in Mind. So today, I aimed originally for 5,000. I never thought I'd get anywhere near that, but today it went over 8,500. So in a way, I didn't need the motivation every step of the way of the Pennine Way, but I'm bowled over by just how much money collectively we've been able to raise. So thank you so much for helping me achieve my life ambition. And as ever, as we go through what could be quite a challenging winter, let's keep working together, stay safe, stay engaged, stay inspired. And for anyone perhaps who hasn't donated, the page is still open. So I think the slides will get circulated. So just click on the link there and yeah, see whether we can go a wee bit higher. But other than that, that was my last slide. So back over to you, Jason.
Thank you, Anne. That's great. Thanks for updating us on that, because I know that a lot of people have been following that and watching it. So now we'll open up to the general Q&A to the floor, and hopefully our speakers are still with us. If they are, that's great. So Pam, perhaps if you could let us know initially if there are any questions and who we need to best direct them to.
Okay, we don't seem to have a lot of questions at the moment because we've gone through and asked them as part of the presentations. However, something has just come up for you, Anne, picking up on what Anne said about who the Alliance needs to reach. What is happening which will enable communication with the vast majority of the industry who have not yet heard or thought about information management as yet?
So would you like me to take that first, Pam?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Yes,
yeah,
please.
Of course. That's why we're constantly saying, do get in touch with us, do help us in reaching out, letting us know what you think of how we can improve on our communication. One of the things I think is key is the affiliate program. So by having affiliates through the professional institutions, the trade associations, they will help us to understand how to change the language and the way that we engage and communicate, so it does actually extend to the thousands of members that are represented through the professional institutions and the trade associations. We're clearly working very closely with British Standards Institution and the Centre of Digital Built Britain for the UK BIM framework. So great question that was raised just then about how we are coordinating across the projects. And certainly that is one of the things that we are looking at through the framework, is how to ensure that we can let people know what our projects are. But to get back to the question of how we extend our outreach, it's something that I think all of the speakers are passionate about. Casey through Building Smart, and Pam and Andy. So I think I'd like to just hand across to Casey, Pam and Andy to continue where I've left off.
I'll chip in there if you like, Anne. Yeah, I mean, it's something I've always said. It's really great seeing the enthusiasm we got from the people that join our calls, the people who go to BIM conferences, and I think there's at Digital Construction Week in October last year, we had an event and I said it would be really great not to see people next year, but if we saw a group of different faces. So it does take a lot. I know people do need approval from people to go to events. It's a little bit easier now. It's a lot more open now that we do a lot of things online. But if you are in a position where you can forego your place at a physical conference when they start again, then please do. Let's get other people interested. Let's get other people aware, at least, of what's going on. Because let's face it, that's why we're all here. We're all here because of those things, because we saw the work that was going on, because we saw the impact it would have. And there are lots of things that people can join in. And I think Andy will probably now say something about the affiliates program now.
Thanks, Casey. Yeah, no, I think Anne touched on that, and absolutely, that's really important in a number of ways, and we're so keen to get on a few more of the main wide-reaching organisations and some of the smaller, more trade-focused associations. That that helps us to penetrate that messaging down the supply chain into those that probably aren't particularly interested or driven to get motivated to understand what we're trying to do as industry, I suppose. So yeah, we hope to grow and mature the affiliate program. Again, the team that are involved in that will need to probably grow that as well. So if anyone listening thinks they may be able to get involved with some of that ahead, then we'll absolutely welcome that. Yeah, really important.
If I could just add on to what Andy, Casey and Anne have summarised as part of the communities team as well, that I'm a part of. It's something that we've recognised because each one of us is a chair or involved with a BIM 4 group or a region group. And it's something that we've recognised that we constantly look to put on events, and the temptation is to go to the latest thing, the latest guidance, the latest piece of tech. And we've recognised that it makes it harder and harder for people to come in at the bottom end who are just starting their BIM journey. So for this reason, we are just setting up a group to specifically talk about BIM basics and what we can put together to try and help almost push that back down through all the BIM 4s and the communities groups, which will give us a great reach across all of the UK and across all of the sectors. Almost go back to the very beginning, looking at the latest standards and say, okay, how do you apply, where do you start, and trying to distill that into a language that more people can understand, because it does get very technical, and it's a language that we all love, which is why we're on these sorts of conferences and involved in these groups. But we've recognised we do need to open this up to a wider audience. So thank you for the question. It's good.
Just to, it's just popped into my head as well, Jason. Sorry, just to add as well on that, and actually it came thinking strategically ahead, and it was a suggestion that came out of the community's leadership, or reminded us that I think it's really important that we look to phrase and contextualise what we're trying to talk about around other initiatives that are going on that engages other people. So I think the golden thread and the building safety bill, things like that, rather than this is an event about BIM, it's about that and how the digital side can support it will help to broaden that audience, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Keeping them topical against the latest things that are happening generally, and then linking that to BIM is a great way into that, like you say, rather than just being about BIM itself.
Exactly.
So thank you for that. Pam, are there any other issues that have been raised?
No, nothing else raised, but George Stevenson would like to make a comment. So George,
Thanks,
over
George.
to you.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I'd just like to reinforce what Andy just said there, and that is making it about business issues and doing it about topical things. And one of the things that we're trying to do in BIM for housing is to move beyond the idea that it's about 3D modeling. And the reason for that is that across the working groups, the people that we've got, there's a lot of people that aren't involved in design. But they are critical to the whole information management journey. So as I think everybody recognises in our community that the key thing is the information rather than a 3D model. But often that's still interpreted by people when people talk about BIM as being about 3D modelling. I think that's one of the barriers that we need to get through to ensure that people are fully engaged and feel part of the process. And I think that's what we're starting to achieve.
Yeah, thanks, George. It's a great point, and it's really good that the BIM for Housing group have tackled it exactly that way, taking real life issues, business problems, and then seeing how the processes that we've got now defined can address those, rather than, like you say, just being about 3D modelling and being driven by design side and construction. So that's great. Thank you. Pam, is there any other questions or comments that have come in?
One quick comment. Patricia, I'm going to actually unmute you if you want. Sorry, Tricia. I keep calling you Patricia. I'm going to try and unmute you so that you can actually talk directly if you want to. So yourself, there you go. So do you want to raise what you commented about?
No, just thanks so much, Pam, and thank you to George. Just to reiterate people to read the plain language guide that the IET's kindly funding, because that supports just what George and what Andy have just been saying.
And if I could just add that I think it's a terrific piece of work that Trish is doing along with IET, and it's a great example of how we really welcome initiatives from other organisations as well that we can support. So any suggestions from other organisations of activities that they'd like us to support in a similar way is most welcome. And that's where I think this collaboration and reaching out across different activities and organisations is so important. So yeah, thank you, Trish.
We have had Richard Taxon suggest, should we not give up the modelling word altogether and call it information management? So BIM could mean better information management, for example. Anybody comment on that one?
Well, I can do is that with the ISO 19650 and the guidance, we don't talk about BIM that much. We talk about information management, and I think that that's what you'll see increasingly, Richard. We have spent so much time, haven't we, debating what the acronym should or shouldn't mean. And we could turn it into digital information management. And I think, I think perhaps we just give up the will and just move on. It's a point well made. You'll know that in my presentations, I often refer to it as better information management. I think I'd probably just like to leave it there, if you don't mind, Richard, but I can completely understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I think the same happened with CAD. You know, computer-aided design comes to mean now 2D drawings, doesn't it? Usually in AutoCAD, and I think the acronym BIM has probably just come to mean 3D modelling. So it might just be that we do the opposite and allow it just to be that, and then we take the information management side to something else. So yeah, plenty to think about and ponder on that one. But it is hard to get over the perception of what the acronym is. Thank you for the question. Pam, is there anything else?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, on behalf of Christine and myself then, I'd like to thank all of our speakers today. So thank you to David, Andy, George, Varun and Will, Casey and Anne, and also big thanks to Pam as well for your time in setting the presentations and make it run smoothly. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.